Guten Abend, Munich.
Wow.
Dankeschön for being here.
And now auf Bayerisch, please.
That is the extent of my German. So.
Servus, it's easy. But it's not your first time in Germany, right?
No, it's not. I spent a lot of time in Berlin in my 20s. It was very, very fun.
And what do you like about Germany so far?
I mean, there's so many things. I love the schnitzel. I really do love the food, surprisingly. I love the people. I think my favorite readings I've ever done have been in Germany. I've had the warmest welcomes. I mean, how often do you get to be on a stage like this and talk to 500 smiling faces? This is just beyond my wildest dreams.
And I'm so happy that I can talk to your smiling face for the next 20 minutes, because I know that you have a lot of fans here. You have one fan here, another one there.
Oh,
but
thank
before
you.
we dive into the story of this book, let's jump into some facts about you. I have read. You grew up in London.
Yes.
Yeah, you stayed there for 15 years, then moved to New York, stayed there for around another 15 years.
Yes.
So is that your mode, because then you moved to LA in 2020. Are you moving every 15 years now for the rest of your life?
No, actually, I only lasted 3 years in LA, and then I moved back to New York.
Oh,
So-
you're back in New York now.
Yes, I am. New York is the home of my heart. I had to come back. I miss being able to walk around. LA is beautiful, but I learned how to drive when I was 31 years old, and honestly, like, the streets of LA were not safe with me on them, so it was better that I came back.
So it was hard to leave New York, the surrounding you had there, the people, then you came back, now you're back to New York. And
Yes.
Another thing I read about you, on your website, you have a little introduction about yourself, and it ends with the words, "If you can't find me, I'm probably in the library."
True.
And honestly, I read that, and I never met you personally, but in that moment, you had my heart. So what is it you like the most about being in a library? I think you have a lot of fans of that sentence here as well.
I mean, I think libraries are just magical spaces. For me, I walk into one, I could be anywhere in the world, I could be experiencing anything, and I immediately feel this sense of peace. I love the quiet, I love the books, I love the light streaming in from the windows. I think it's really special to have places where we can come together as a community and express our love for literature, especially since reading is a solitary act. You know, we do it in private usually, so walking into a room and seeing people just quietly reading is, for me, like, that is heaven. I think heaven is just like one big library with a sign that says welcome in.
And
Let's
God
print-
constantly going, psh.
Yes, and God saying, keep it down. People are trying to read.
But what is your typical library behavior? Are you the one strolling around between the shelves, or do you just sit at one place reading or writing and being silent?
I am like headphones in, chewing a pack of gum usually, having like 3 different drinks in front of me, like a matcha, a sparkling water, a Diet Coke, so 3 different chocolate bars, Ritter Sport, usually my absolute favorite. But you say it, Ritter Sport.
Rittersport.
Okay, it sounds better.
No product placement here.
And usually I'm like typing away, and I'm the person who like is looking up and glaring at someone if they're whispering too loudly. Unfortunately, I am that library person.
Okay. And you wrote the biggest part of Cleopatra and Frankenstein in a library, is
Yes.
that right? Mm-hmm. And Blue Sisters, you changed your writing habits, or was it same for that?
It really couldn't have been more different. I wrote Cleopatra and Frankenstein in the NYU library, so it was the school that I did undergrad in and my master's. So I was always surrounded by students of all different ages. So even when I had been graduated for maybe 6 or 7 years and probably shouldn't be in the library anymore, I should be like grown up and moved on, I was still there typing away. And then when I wrote Blue Sisters, I moved to LA, and about a month later, we went into lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote it living in a little bungalow on the beach in Venice, LA.
Oh,
Really-
that sounds horrible.
Yes, it was.
Wow.
It was a tragic time in
my
my
God.
life. It was like me and the seagulls.
Oh my God.
And it was a very sort of quiet, inward time to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
It felt very, very different. It had a very different energy, and I think it allowed me to go a little bit deeper with the characters and kind of excavate their emotional story with sort of further depth.
But you wrote it after the huge success of Cleopatra and Frankenstein. So you already went through the whole process of producing a book, from the first word to the label Sunday Times bestseller. Wow. Was that making everything easier because you knew everything, or maybe it was the opposite, harder because, I don't know, pressure or something like that, you thought, oh, maybe it was a lucky strike and I can't do it again?
Actually, I wrote a lot of Blue Sisters before Cleopatra and Frankenstein ever even came out, because I sold it in 2020 and it published in 2022 in America and the UK. So I had about 2 years to work on this book. And I really felt no pressure because Cleopatra and Frankenstein had been very difficult to sell. You know, I've always been very open about the fact that 30 publishers turned it down and one of them offered to read it again and eventually bought it. So I really kind of felt like it was actually such a hard thing to get that book out into the world that I didn't have such high expectations of it. Like, all I wanted was for it to be a book in a bookshop that someone other than my immediate family would read. So I would say mission accomplished. So while I was working on Blue Sisters, I felt like whatever happens, I know I finished one book. I know that book is coming out. The pressure is really only of my own making. And it took Cleopatra and Frankenstein an entire year to become a bestseller, which I'm really proud of, because the reason it is a bestseller is because the readers recommended it to each other and talked about it and championed it on BookStock and Bookstagram. And they are the ones that like rose it slowly month by month up the ranks until it finally hit the bestseller list. So it's really all thanks to my readers.
So maybe it's even the best way to see it growing like this, so everyone likes it. Really, it's not like a push from I don't know where, but it's really the people that like it. So let's jump into the story here. What inspired you to write Blue Sisters and to write about the topic of siblinghood or sisterhood in especially?
I had been thinking a lot about my own relationship to my siblings, you know, around that time, 2020, because I had moved far away from them and I was really missing my own family. And I really hadn't seen anywhere in literature or TV or film, I thought, an exploration of sisterhood that was as messy and intense and ugly and beautiful as my own sibling relationships felt. And I didn't want to write about my own family, so I started thinking about the kind of iconography of four sisters, you know, the most famous being Little Women. But I loved this idea of the magic of four women in one family and what would happen if they became three. How would they find harmony again in this destabilized number? So I started imagining these sisters, and I wanted to write sisters that love each other unconditionally, but fight viciously and forgive wholeheartedly. And so that was my challenge.
And it's a very special relationship with every sibling, I would say. I quote you, you said once that your sister is the only person you know that you would die for, but only also want to kill.
Yes. Direct quote.
That's pretty accurate.
Yes. I think that's having a sibling, you know, in a nutshell.
So, and a second topic in this book is one that is, I would say, a taboo in a lot of countries, if not all of them. Why did you decide to write about addiction and sobriety in this story here especially?
I think over and over again, I'm drawn to writing about the topics that are hard to talk about. I think that literature gives us a private and vulnerable space where we can start to explore some of the parts of our lives that can feel really shrouded in silence and shame. And the reality of addiction is that many, many people deal with it in their lifetime, either themselves or many of us love or are related to someone who has struggled with addiction. And yet it can be so hard to talk about, and the experience of it, I know firsthand, is deeply lonely and incredibly isolating at times. And for me, the most powerful thing that a book can do is make someone feel less alone. And I felt that I was sort of uniquely positioned to write about this because I'm 8 years sober, I'm very proudly sober, many members of my family are sober. So I felt that I could write about it with both compassion, which is so important, and rigorous honesty about the destruction that it does cause in a family. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in this book is hearing from readers that they have seen some of their own experiences reflected and they feel less, you know, ashamed or alone in those experiences. That for me makes me feel like, oh, like that's the best thing I ever could have done with my life.
And I think it's very impressive to hear you talking about that because you do it in a very open way. You say, yes, I had this party time. It was maybe, I don't know, self-destructive, and then there was a point I changed something, and now I know it better. How, if you want to talk about it, how can we imagine your everyday and especially every night life back then in those days?
I mean, I think there was always this inner conflict in me between wanting to kind of escape myself, through drugs, through alcohol, through parties, and this like deep, deep desire to be a writer and to make something of my potential. And I remember feeling like, I wish I could just separate my nights from my days. Like, I still want to be able to wake up and go to the library and write, but I also want to have this way of just getting out of my head and getting out of my feelings, because I felt so much and it was so almost unbearable to experience that. And so, I made a change when I was 26. I got sober. I was in the middle of writing my first book. I got help. I found community. I became honest. And I have to say, like, when I write about it and when I talk about it, what I feel is that I feel so free. I feel complete freedom from any sense of failure, which I felt for a long time. And my teacher, Martin Amos, who's one of my favorite writers, used to say that fiction is freedom, marvelous and intimidating freedom. And I think that if I want to be really free in my work, I have to be free in my life. Mm-hmm. And so I try to make decisions that allow me to be as open about who I am as possible. And I really hope that it helps someone else feel that they're able to be open about who they are. You don't have to do it in front of 500 people. That's not necessary. But
it can be one way.
Yes, but to be vulnerable and open with someone and to ask for help if you need it in whatever that like realm of life that might be.
Mm-hmm. So one thing is proved, to get out of this deep talk here a little. Books can make people try new things as well. I saw you boxing.
Yes.
Like a pro.
I try.
As research.
Yes.
Tell us more.
So I've always loved boxing. I like watching boxing. And when I started writing this book, I wanted to write about sisters that are very different to each other and have very different interests and careers and skill sets. And again, I hadn't seen a ton in, literary fiction in which women are athletes and physical and sporty. So I decided I wanted to write Bonnie, the middle sister, as a professional boxer. And in order to do that, I found a boxing coach nearby me in LA. I basically knocked on his door.
Hello, I'm an author. I want to box.
And asked him, I was like, I want you to train me like a fighter. And he was like, that's going to be hard. But we trained 3 days a week for a year, mostly on the beach because it was the pandemic. So we were outside. I had, the golden boxing gloves. I love to accessorize and pick out a cute color, a head guard, mouth guard, cup, everything. And we started with the smallest things, which is really defense, trying not to get hit, and then worked all the way up to fully sparring. And it was amazing. Probably the thing I'm most proud of from this book is that I got a black eye while writing it, which I think is really
unique.
Tough.
Yeah,
that's a great story for critics to tell
exactly.
them. I can box very well.
Exactly. Be careful.
Be careful. Yeah. So for Bonnie's part of the story, you took boxing lessons. What was necessary to fill the other Blues sisters with their life? What did you learn?
The youngest sister, Lucky, is a professional model and living in Paris. And I had worked in the fashion industry for many years. I was a fashion copywriter. So I was somewhat familiar kind of with the fashion scene ambiently. But in order to write her, I interviewed, I think probably between 5 and 10 professional models, mostly about the earliest years of their career, trying to understand what that was like to become professional so young and to be essentially objectified so young, and what was glamorous about it, what was exciting about it, what was scary about it. I'm always interested in exploring the darkness and the light and kind of balancing the two, how did this career give her opportunities? How did this career perhaps limit her growth in other ways? So that was really fascinating. And then Avery, the eldest sister, is a lawyer. And actually, my elder sister is a lawyer, but I didn't talk to her about it, weirdly.
What?
Because I thought she would think it was too much based on her, which it's definitely not. So I ended up talking to someone else. But Avery, I just instinctively knew. I felt like I knew her so well. She required less kind of technical research, and for her it was more because she's the eldest daughter. I didn't yet know that there is a phrase, eldest daughter syndrome, which is that you take care of everyone around you and basically you make the world work, and we all owe you everything. The reason the world functions is because of eldest eldest daughters, it turns out, but I had lots of conversations. I'm the baby of my family, so I had lots of conversations with friends who are the eldest children, just trying to understand what that felt like, what that role in the family is like, what you gain from being that role, and what you potentially lose by having to be so responsible for everyone from such a young age.
So it seems that you get really deep into a character while writing. I mean, for those sisters, for example, do you really picture them so you know how they look and how they would move and what they say? And are they still there after a book is printed in your life, in your head?
Yeah, they really are. Like, they're so alive for me. I mean, it makes me sound a bit crazy because I'm still talking to them sometimes. My husband's like, what? Like,
Where?
Like, I'll see someone on the street wearing an outfit and I'm like, that's so lucky, you know? Or I'll hear a song and it will feel like something the sisters would have sung along to. I think for me, like, if they're alive for me, they're going to be alive for the reader. And I personally, what I love about fiction and why I read fiction is characters. Like, I want to know what it's like to exist as another person. It's this incredible kind of time travel, space travel, life travel that we get to have, you know, just through the pages of a book. That's kind of miraculous to me. So the deeper I can go with a character, the more granular and detail-oriented, the more alive they'll be on the page, the more connected the reader is going to be to them.
And your readers are connected. This is why I can see the iPad here next to me,
Yes.
full of questions.
We've got a lot
from
of
our
people, not only here in the studio, but at home watching, and they're typing in questions. And you talked about libraries and how you put on your headphones and glare at everyone who's too loud. When you put those headphones on, what kind of music are you listening to? Do you have a specific playlist you listen to while writing?
This is such a great question because I'm a huge believer in using music to help with writer's block. I think music is an incredibly powerful tool as a writer when you're feeling stuck or you need to just get into an emotion quickly. I listen to a lot of movie scores because they're kind of large scale and epic and emotional and tonal. I always shout out and say how much I love Florence and the Machines. Like, she, for me, is my favorite singer of all time. I love her lyrics, I love her voice, and the scale of emotion in her work, this kind of operatic range that she's in. I'll listen to a song of hers and I think, how can I get a scene to feel as full and kind of exciting as this song does? So yeah, music is a huge, huge inspiration for me. If I wasn't a writer, I wish I could have been a singer, but you don't want to hear me sing.
Do you have a Blue Sisters playlist?
I had different playlists for each of the sisters. It was part of how I kept them very separate. They have their own color schemes, their own playlists, their own cities, their own like fashion stories, like very separate worlds, so that I could make them very distinct. Like the Powerpuff Girls.
Like that, yeah. Same.
Same.
Let's stay in the library. Do you have any library you could recommend for people that, if you think about it, you have to visit? If you're in New York, for example, you have to visit this specific library.
I mean, the New York Public Library is the iconic library. It has the lions outside. It's really, really beautiful. It is famously where Carrie and Big almost got married in the movie, so another reason to visit it. My favorite library in the world so far, because I haven't visited all of them clearly, I think it's probably the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. It's a really incredible, beautiful space. Getting that library card was really difficult. Like, at the time, this sounds like a humble brag, but I had been nominated for an award in France. It's like the only award I got nominated for. And I went to the library and I was working on my book, and my friend spoke French and was trying to get me a card, and he was like, she's been nominated for this big book award. And the librarian looks at me and in French says, I've never heard of her. And then she made me do like a full...
Certainly he didn't tell you this in English because French people are not
I could tell what she was saying. And she made me create a 20-book bibliography to prove that I was serious about my research in order to get this library card, which I still proudly have, and it is one of my most prized possessions. So I love that library, and I'm very, very glad to be allowed to be a member.
Do you send every new book to that person, like signed?
I still don't think she would care. I'm like, that French librarian, when I can win her over, that's going to be better than winning a Pulitzer, you know?
It's going to keep you going.
Yeah, you got to have a goal in life.
So you just told me backstage that you're going to Vienna, right?
I've just come from Vienna.
You come there is a huge and so beautiful library as well.
I know, this is the problem with being on a book tour is you like only get a limited amount of time, so I have to prioritize. So it was the hot chocolates, it was like the sweet treats.
Okay, fair.
It was Empress Sissy, if anyone's been to her museum, and I went to go see the Gustav Klimts, which was just spiritual,
Next time,
phenomenal.
maybe. So last question, because I know you are writing your third novel right now. Can you tell us something, anything? We take anything.
Well, it's set in Paris, so that's one big part of it.
At the Bibliothèque Nationale?
Maybe the librarian will have to make a little cameo. That's the ultimate revenge of the writer. It's set in Paris, and it's about a woman deciding whether or not to go back to America to have a child. So she's at a sort of crossroads in her life between choosing a life of seeming freedom and creating art and travel, or creating a life of family and domesticity, wanting both, fearing she can't have both, and trying to make this big decision in the hottest summer in Paris's history.
Wow, we can't wait for that one. And we say,
I can't wait to finish it.
You can imagine. And we say thank you very much for being here. A big applause, please. Coco Mellors. Thank you.
Thank you so much.